Today we uncover a tale of betrayal hidden in faded paper. You'll witness Mara's discovery of letters detailing Luca's embezzlement for their indebted mother. The beach house holds these forgotten words that she never sent. What lurks behind the family facade is a cold fracture no one admits. You will remember this. The salt air clung to the old beach house like a reluctant memory, seeping through the cracked window frames as Mara pushed open the door. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light, filtering through faded curtains that once billowed with their childhood laughter. She hadn't been back in years, not since the holidays when Luca's forced smile had cracked the facade. Now, alone in the echoing kitchen, she felt the house breathing, its wooden floors creaking under her steps, whispering of secrets buried deeper than the tide. Her fingers trembled as she knelt by the sideboard, pulling out the shoebox tucked in the shadows. Letters, yellowed and tied with twine, spilled onto the floor like forgotten confessions. She had written them in the sleepless nights after the betrayal, after Luca's quiet embezzlement from their shared inheritance had vanished her savings, her dreams of independence swallowed in legal fees and shame. One envelope, addressed in her looping script to Luca, bore the postmark she never stamped. She slid it open, the paper brittle as her resolve. "I can't keep pretending." The words blurred under her gaze. "You chose her, Mom, over us, over me. But how do I say it without losing you?" The ink swam with the melancholy that had anchored her for so long, a heavy fog rolling in from the sea outside. Each line dragged her back to that moment. Luca's hesitant call, his voice tight with excuses, the way he'd shielded their mother from the fallout of her debts, siphoning funds without a word. Silence was the real fracture, crumbling trust grain by grain. She could acknowledge the hurt, her role in it, his desperation, without shattering everything. Or could she? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as she rose, the box under her arm, ready to face him. Later that day, drawn by the need to unravel her thoughts aloud, Mara drove to Robin's house. The afternoon light slanted through Robin's cluttered living room, casting long shadows over stacks of books and half-empty mugs. Mara sat on the edge of the worn couch, her fingers twisting the frayed hem of her sweater, as if holding onto the threads could keep the past from unraveling. Robin leaned forward in her armchair, eyes steady, a quiet force pulling at the silence Mara had wrapped around herself like armor. "Tell me again," Robin said softly, not demanding, but insistent, like a tide coaxing secrets from the shore. "From the beginning, when did it start cracking?" Mara's gaze drifted to the wall clock, its hands ticking methodically, each second a small accusation. It had been their mother's old clock, salvaged from the beach house, sturdy oak frame, face yellowed by salt air. Now it hung here, in Robin's space, marking time that Mara had tried to freeze. She exhaled, the sound heavy with the ache of years unspoken. Longing tugged at her, a dull throb for the brother who once shared whispers under the pier, before the money vanished, before Luca's choices left her scrambling, independence shattered like glass underfoot. It was the summer after college. Mara began, her voice low, threading through the room like smoke. "Luca said he needed a loan, for the business, to keep Mom from worrying. I gave it all, every cent from my savings, the one thing I built on my own." The words spilled out, chronological fragments piecing together the fracture, the forged signatures, the delayed repayments that turned to excuses, the way he'd looked her in the eye at family dinners, pretending the rift wasn't widening. Nostalgia clawed at her chest, the shared kitchen smells, the laughter that masked the lie, making her throat tighten. Why had she let it fester? The clock ticked louder in her mind, relentless. Robin nodded, mirroring the pain without flinching. And now he's holed up at the beach house again, after that awkward holiday nod. You're carrying this alone, Mara. Hiding won't stitch it back. Mara's thoughts raced, a whirlwind of what-ifs. The betrayal wasn't just Luca's deceit. It was her silence, enabling the distance, letting resentment build like driftwood on the tide. But as Robin's questions peeled back the layers, the longing shifted, sharpened into something fiercer. Resolve flickered, warm against the chill of avoidance. No more burying it. I have to go there, she said finally, the words solidifying. The beach house. Face him where it all started. Robin smiled faintly, the catalyst in motion. Then that's where it begins. Time doesn't wait. The clock's hands crept forward, indifferent. Through whose hours would the confession finally tick into being? With Robin's encouragement echoing in her mind, Mara returned home that evening, where the pull of family drew her to the kitchen. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, as it always had. Warm, yeasty loaves cooling on the wire rack, a scent that tugged at Mara's chest like an old anchor. She stood at the counter, phone in hand, scrolling through messages from Robin, her thumb hovering over Luca's contact. The words blurred. We need to talk. The beach house? Tomorrow? Her mind churned, a storm of half-formed accusations. Why now? Why, after all these years of his silence, his vanishing act post-holiday? Nadia watched from the kitchen table, her hands folded over a chipped mug of tea, steam curling like unspoken regrets. The table was scarred from decades of family meals, etched lines from knives, rings from hot pots, a map of their shared history. Mara avoided its gaze, focusing instead on the screen. But her mother's voice cut through softly, persistent as the tide outside. You're really doing this then? Reaching out to him? Nadia's tone was gentle, not probing, but it carried the weight of knowing. Fragments of the betrayal she'd pieced together over whispered phone calls and Mara's evasive silences. Mara's throat tightened, a pang of longing for the brother who'd once built sandcastles with her on that very shore, before his lie shattered it all. The financial deceit, siphoning her savings to cover their mother's debts, leaving her adrift for years. She'd buried it, told herself silence was protection. But now the ache bloomed, heavy and unrelenting. I have to, Mom. If I don't, it'll eat me alive. Nadia nodded, tracing a finger along a deep groove in the wood, as if reading the table's secrets. And what if truth feels like betrayal to him, or to you? Her eyes held Mara's, steady, urging without force. We've all carried this quiet too long. Luca's choices hurt, but your anger, it's kept you both apart. What if speaking it doesn't break the tie, but mends it? Mara leaned against the counter, the phone slipping in her grip. Thoughts swirled. Was it all his fault? Or had she enabled it, turning a blind eye to his desperation, her own resentment a shield? The longing twisted into something sharper, resolve hardening like dough under kneading hands. She typed the message. Hit send. Beach house, pier, at dusk. No more avoiding. The table seemed to witness it, its worn surface a silent confessor, holding the fractures they'd ignored. Nadia smiled faintly, the air lightening just a fraction. That's the start. Truth isn't the enemy, Mara. It's what silence has been hiding all along. But as Mara pocketed the phone, the question lingered in the flower-dusted light. What truth would finally eclipse that long shadow? The next morning, before heading to the beach house, Mara walked the shoreline to steady her nerves. The salt-stung wind tugged at Mara's hair as she paced the shoreline, her boots sinking into the wet sand where the tide had just retreated. Each step unearthed fragments of their secret language. The codes Luca and she had invented as kids, whispered under the pier to outwit the world. "Wave 3 times for danger," he'd say, his grin sharp as shells. Back then, those signals bound them like invisible rope, pulling them through their mother's quiet storms and their father's absences. Now, they felt like anchors dragging her under. A wave crashed nearby, its roar a low murmur that echoed the ebb of trust between them. She remembered the night of the betrayal clearest here. Luca's voice on the phone, casual as driftwood, admitting he'd siphoned her savings for some half-baked scheme to save the family. Years of her independence washed away in that single choice, leaving her adrift. The water whispered it back to her. Trust retreating, grain by grain, just like the foam dissolving at her feet. Why did these memories flood now, when she was so close to facing him? They tempted her to turn back, to let nostalgia blanket the hurt like fog over the horizon. She paused, staring at the pier's weathered legs, where they'd buried those time capsules with promises etched in childish scrawl. The conflict churned inside. Part of her wanted to cling to the old codes, to signal all clear, and pretend the rift hadn't formed. But the waves kept coming, relentless, uncovering what silence had buried. No more deferring, she thought. Robin's words from their last call echoed. "Pin it down, Mara. The beach house, tomorrow at dusk. Say it out loud." Nadia had nodded over tea, her eyes soft with the family's unspoken rule. Protect at all costs. But adding, cost includes the truth, eventually. Her gaze dropped to a single sandy footprint ahead, half eroded by the surf, its edges blurring as another wave lapped close. Was it hers from an earlier walk, or Luca's from some forgotten visit? It lingered there, a fragile trace of passage, not erased, but reshaped by the pull of the sea. The past wasn't a shelter anymore, she realized. It was this, impermanent, pointing forward. Nostalgia twisted in her chest, a deep ache for the brother who'd once been her compass. But it sharpened into something clearer. Awareness that burying the pain only left these fading marks, unhealed. The waves rolled on, their rhythm a steady voice cutting through the haze. How did their sound pull the truth to the surface, making her hear what she'd ignored? She straightened, the weight shifting from resentment to resolve. The meeting was set. Courage gathered like seashells in her pocket. No more codes to hide behind. Back at the beach house that afternoon, Mara climbed to the attic for deeper insight. Mara sat cross-legged on the worn floorboards of the beach house attic, dust motes swirling in the slanted afternoon light like forgotten confessions. The box of letters, her own mostly, scribbled in fits of rage and sealed away, spilled open before her, yellowed edges curling like waves retreating from shore. She had come here to dissect Luca's silence, to pin down the moment it calcified between them after his betrayal, that financial gut punch that stole her shot at independence. Why had he buried it? Why let the lie fester? Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the first one, dated 2 years back. You think you can just vanish after what you did? Mom's fragile enough without your secrets. Awareness hit first, sharp as salt spray, a cold clarity that she'd been complicit too in letting the quiet stretch. She'd seen the strain in his eyes at holidays, the way he'd deflect with forced smiles. But why? She rifled deeper, past her unsent accusations, to a crumpled note in his handwriting, tucked in the box's false bottom. It wasn't meant for her. It was a draft, addressed to their mother, Nadia. Mom, I handled the accounts wrong. Tried to shield you from the debts after Dad. Mara doesn't know how bad it was. If she finds out, it'll break us all. Let me carry this." The words blurred. Luca's motive wasn't greed or indifference. It was this: a desperate bid to protect Nadia, to spare her the echo of their father's collapse. The attic air thickened, her breath catching on the realization. He'd chosen silence not to evade her, but to hold the family whole, however cracked. Awareness bloomed into something softer, a reluctant compassion seeping in like tide water over pebbles. She'd accused him of cowardice, but here was his fear, mirroring hers, the terror of shattering what little they had left. She pressed the letter to her chest, the paper's creases like veins under skin. Her own role surfaced unbidden. Those times she'd nodded along, avoiding the hard questions to keep the peace. The resentment she'd nursed? It eased, not dissolved, but softened at the edges. He hadn't justified the hurt, he'd just tried to contain it, for all of them. And she? She'd let silence be her shield too. What truth could pierce this veil without unraveling everything? The question hung unanswered as the waves murmured below. That evening, alone in her room before the meeting, Mara prepared her words. Mara stood in the dim glow of her bedroom, the mirror propped against the wall like an uninvited witness. Her reflection stared back, eyes shadowed, jaw tight, hair falling loose from its hasty knot. She paced a tight circle, phone clutched in one hand, thumb hovering over the record button. The words tumbled out first in a rush, accusatory and sharp. "Luca, you knew what that money meant to me. You took it, buried it under some half-baked excuse about the house, about Mom. You left me scraping by for years, and you never said a word." She stopped, breath catching, and leaned closer to the glass. Her image fractured slightly in the old frame's edge, a hairline crack snaking through the corner, like the family photo she'd shattered last week. Thoughts swirled. He protected her, shielded Mom from the fallout. But what about us? What about me? The rehearsed lines felt heavy, loaded with the resentment she'd nursed like a secret bruise. But blaming him alone was a trap, a way to keep the silence alive. She hit record, voice dropping to a murmur as she tried again. "Luca, I need to say this right. You chose silence to spare her pain. I get that now. The letters in the attic, they showed me. But it cost us everything. And I let it. I saw the signs, the way you'd dodge my calls, the excuses piling up like driftwood on the shore. I didn't push, didn't demand the truth because I was scared too. Scared of losing you, of cracking open what was left of us." Her free hand pressed against the cool mirror, palm flat, as if anchoring herself. The reflection blurred with a sheen of unshed tears, guilt mirroring hurt, accusation softening into something raw. The phone beeped, capturing the stutter in her words, the pause where doubt crept in. She played it back, listening to her own voice echo in the quiet room. Not a prosecutor's rant, but a confession laced with her own complicity. The flurry in her chest eased, replaced by a steady resolve, like the tide pulling back to reveal the shore's hidden lines. She nodded at her reflection, lips curving faintly. Not a smile, but a decision. This is how I meet him. Not as the wronged sister, but as the one who's been silent too. She saved the note, pocketed the phone, and turned away. The mirror held her gaze a moment longer, questioning. Had she truly heard the woman staring back, sifted the grudge from the honest ache? As dusk approached, Mara arrived early at the site, waiting with anticipation building. The salt-laced wind whipped across the shoreline, scouring the dunes like a confession long overdue. Mara stood at the edge of the weathered pier's shadow, where the sand dipped into a shallow hollow. their childhood vault, now half eroded by tides that never forgave secrets. She had come early, as if punctuality could armor her against the unraveling. The time capsule lay partially unearthed there, its rusted tin glinting like a buried promise, edges softened by years of salt and neglect. She knelt, fingers tracing the lid, feeling the cool metal pulse with memories. Scribbled notes of eternal alliance, trinkets from summers when Luca was her anchor, not her fracture. Tension coiled in her chest, a tight knot of what-ifs. What if he didn't show? What if he did? And the words she'd rehearsed, raw admissions of her own silence, her complicity in the lie, spilled out too soon, or not at all. The wind tugged at her coat, carrying the faint crash of waves, urging her to bolt, to let the sea swallow this moment like so many others. She could walk away quietly, preserve the fragile shell of their bond. But no. Her pulse quickened, a resolve hardening against the pull. This was the place where they'd sworn truths as kids. Turning back now would mock that vow. She rose, eyes scanning the horizon, the hollow of the capsule mirroring the ache in her gut. Footsteps crunched in the distance, his. The sound grew nearer, deliberate, closing the gap she'd let widen for years. Waiting wasn't fleeing. It was the first tether, a silent offer of trust amid the ruins. How to stand firm in this echo of the past, letting it propel her forward instead of chaining her. The wind cleared the air, sharp and cleansing, as his silhouette sharpened against the fading light. She straightened, breath steadying, ready to voice what the capsule could no longer hold. Soon after, Luca arrived, and the confrontation began. The wind off the dunes whipped sand against their legs, but Mara barely felt it. She stood by the rusted tin they'd buried as kids, the time capsule, half exposed now by relentless tides, its edges softened like forgotten promises. Luca was there, arms crossed, his face a mask of guarded regret, the same one he'd worn at the holiday table before vanishing again. The air hung heavy, thick with the salt of unspoken years. She opened her mouth, the words she'd rehearsed in the dim attic light bubbling up like accusations. You lied to me, Luca. You took everything. Her pulse hammered, urging her to strike first, to seize control before he could slip away again. But no. The fear coiled tighter, a vice in her chest. If she started with blame, they'd shatter like that old photo frame in the beach house, fragments scattering forever. She needed to lead with the crack in her own armor, the guilt that had festered alongside her hurt. I'm scared, she said instead, her voice a thread, barely audible over the waves crashing below the weathered pier. Luca's brows furrowed, his defenses flickering, but not dropping. She pressed on, hands trembling as she knelt by the capsule, fingers tracing its dented lid. Scared that if I say this, you'll walk away for good. And it's not just you. I've been scared for years. I let the silence grow because I was afraid too. Afraid of what it meant that I didn't fight harder back then. I blamed you, but I hid my own part in it. The way I shut down, pretended it didn't break me. The confession hung there, raw and unpolished, pulling the tension from her like a receding tide. Luca uncrossed his arms, his shoulders easing just a fraction, eyes meeting hers not with defiance, but something softer. Recognition, maybe. The capsule gleamed dully in the fading light, a relic holding their child selves, now witness to this adult unraveling. Relief seeped in, tentative, as the space between them widened not with anger, but breath. He shifted, mouth parting, but the words waited, the path open. Had she truly begun with vulnerability? Or was this just the calm before the storm? Luca then opened up in response. The wind off the dunes whipped sand against their legs, the time capsule half buried in the earth like a stubborn secret. Mara stood there, the rusted tin lid cracked open between them, childhood trinkets spilling out, faded shells, a pressed leaf, notes in looping kid scroll promising forever. Luca knelt, his fingers tracing the edge, eyes fixed on the ground as if the past might swallow him whole. I kept quiet because, God, Mara, the shame. His voice cracked, low and raw, carrying over the crash of waves. Relief washed through him first, a breath he'd held for years finally escaping, shoulders dropping as the words tumbled free. That money I took, it wasn't just about me screwing up. Dad's mess left us broke, and I thought if I fixed it quick, borrowed from your savings without asking, I could shield Mom from another hit. She was already breaking, you know, pretending everything was fine in that kitchen, stirring soup like it could mend us. Mara's chest tightened, the air thick with salt and unsaid things. She wanted to lash out, but the words stuck. His fear mirrored hers now, a shared shadow. The capsule glinted in the fading light, its contents a fragile map of what they'd buried. Not just toys, but trust. But I let it fester, Luca went on, voice softening into humility, gaze lifting to meet hers. Eyes red-rimmed, he looked smaller, the brother she'd armored against now just a man unraveling. Every time you called, I dodged, afraid the truth would shatter her, shatter us. What if naming it made the family we clung to gone? I'm sorry, Mara. For the silence most of all. It wasn't protection, it was cowardice. The tension hummed between them, her pulse echoing the tide's pull. She saw it then, not the enemy who'd stolen her stability, but a man haunted by the same ghosts. Relief ebbed into something quieter, a humbled ache in her gut, urging her to step closer. The capsule lay open, demanding they fill it anew, not with lies, but with this messy truth. Don't throw it back at me, he whispered, standing slowly, hands open. The pain's here. Let's work it through. Together, if you can. The question hung in the salt air, unspoken. Could she take his hurt into hers, build from these exposed ruins? The shore waited, indifferent, as the waves lapped closer. With the confession behind them, they began to walk along the shore. The sun hung low over the coastal haze, painting the tide-changed shore in strokes of amber and slate. Mara and Luca stepped onto the damp sand together, their footprints mingling unevenly with the retreating waves. The air carried the salt, sharp tang of the sea, a rhythm that had always pulled at them, ebb and flow, like the unspoken years between them. No words yet. Just the crunch of shells underfoot, the slow unraveling of tension in their shoulders. Mara's chest loosened first, a quiet relief blooming as the water lapped at their ankles, cool and insistent. She glanced at Luca, his face etched with the same guarded hope she'd worn for so long. The confession earlier, at the time capsule, words spilling like unearthed relics, had cracked something open. But now, walking side by side, the weight of it settled. This wasn't the end, just the start of a slog. Honesty over distance, truth over the old, stubborn silence that had kept them apart. She felt the pull to accuse again, to poke at the fresh wounds of his financial betrayal. But she swallowed it down. No more hiding behind blame. Luca's hand brushed hers accidentally, then stayed, a tentative anchor. It's not going to be easy, he murmured, voice barely above the waves' whisper. Relief lingered in his eyes, but doubt flickered too, the fear that one wrong step could drag them under. No, Mara agreed, her breath sinking with the tide's retreat. But we're here, together. The shore stretched ahead, marked by the sea's patient erosion, revealing smooth stones long buried. It mirrored them, layers stripped away, not by force, but time and choice. Acceptance crept in, warm against the chill spray, as they paused where the dunes met water. Silences exchanged like nods, a new pact forming in the spaces between. Share the pain, not bury it. Let the sea's breaths carry it out. They turned back toward the weathered pier, steps deliberate, unhurried. The question lingered unspoken in the salt air. Were they ready for this slow march, step by fragile step, holding onto the truth they'd finally claimed?